So tell me about growing up in, do you remember growing up in California at all?
Well, I guess some of my first memories are when we still lived in Woodland. We kind of had an interesting situation. My dad was a high school graduate, had gone to work in a Standard Oil of California service station in 1920, the mid-1920s, worked up to manager, and I've often wondered, since I was in the womb in October 29 when the great crash hit the stock market, if I would have been around if I had not already been underway, because I was just...
Were you inseminated before the crash actually happened?
I was underway before the crash happened, obviously, being born in February of 1930. So...
Because the crash was when?
October 29.
Wow.
So anyway, my great-grandfather Macajah Oglesby Harling had come across the plains in a wagon from St. Joseph, Missouri in the 1850s. They settled in California.
Keep going.
And
yeah.
he had run a general store in a community called Buckeye, California, in the Sacramento Valley, and apparently did reasonably well with his store, and bought land. He owned a good-sized farm in the Buckeye area. Then he bought 80 acres in what they call Willow Oak. And
was that Ohio, or where was that?
This was the Sacramento Valley of California.
California, okay.
And he made a lot of money with his farming, and became a personal friend of Giannini, who started the old Bank of Italy, which then became Bank of America. And so when Bank of America opened in Woodland, why my grandfather got a job as manager there.
Of Bank of America?
With Bank of America. And that lasted until 29 or 30. And he went with another bank then. The crash had happened. And
the Bank of America survived, didn't they? They survived the crash.
They survived, but they had problems. And went to work for Bank of Woodland, and they went broke. And
it's good snacks.
In 33 or 4.
Right.
And he lost his job and went into an insurance business. He ran a casualty insurance business, a brokerage type insurance business. Anyway, the old man, in order to keep everybody close to him, he had a large house, helped my granddad and grandmother buy a big house next door. And he had 2 boys. Ben was the other one. And put Ben in a big house right across the street. Then when the kids started having children, my grandfather and grandmother, John Douglas and Catherine, had a girl and a boy, Margaret, and my dad, Robert. The old man gave each of them a house. Now remember, in those days, you could build a good house for about $5,000 or less.
Well, there's a lot of money then.
And so both Margaret and my dad had homes in Woodland on Cross Street, right next to each other, right behind the grandparents' home. And in those days, the grandparents had a building that had been a stable before my time. They also had a big chicken house, raised chickens in their backyard. They really had a little family compound, so to speak. The old man died in 1934, my great-grandfather. And about that time, Dad, who was working in a service station, Mother never did work at that time. She was busy raising me and my brother, who came along in 1935. So anyway...
what did he die of? What did he die of? In 1934, you said he died.
He died, I really don't know what he died of. In those days, you know, life expectancy was about 57 or 8. And they always said he died of old age, but I really don't know. The Harlings all tended to be heavy, and
Was he a heavy guy?
my grandfather died young. He died in his 60s.
Was it Harling?
Yeah. And was reportedly choked to death. Apparently vomited and choked on his vomit and died in the hospital. He'd gone to the hospital for
Like pneumonia or something?
something like that, yes.
Yeah. That's terrible.
So anyway, that was, but you asked about my earliest memories. I remember riding my tricycle one time. They say as a youngster you remember significant things.
Mm-hmm.
I remember going off a curve with my tricycle, and one of the back wheels had lost its little hubcap, and the cutter key was there, and managed to cut the side of my foot very deeply, and they took me to the clinic to get stitched
Did you
up.
go get stitches or no?
Yes,
Do you remember how many?
no, I don't. But anyway, I do remember that episode. I was probably about 3 then. I remember the trip out to the farm at below. Now, I mentioned that the grandparents, great-grandfather had land. He had 80 acres of land with a hill in the middle of it, at Willow Oak, which was a school district. And he offered to, oh, yes, crap over it.
Come here.
Anyway, the old man decided to rent the house in town and move out to this ranch. It's about 3.5 miles out of Woodland. The old man had owned 80 acres, and he gave 40 to Uncle Ben. He gave 40 to my granddad. And the hill with the house on it was what he gave to Uncle Ben. And the land he gave to my granddad was level, but didn't have any house on it. And I guess he figured that was an equal deal because Uncle Ben got a house, but he got some land that was not, you couldn't irrigate it. Now that area of Sacramento Valley to grow anything you had to irrigate.
Mm-hmm.
You had irrigation canals that came down from Clear Lake, which was up in the foothills. Anyway, Uncle Ben told my dad that, I was told this later, that he would rent the house and there was a barn and a chicken house and what they called a tank house. At one time it had a garage down below and had a space for a water tank for a water system.
Like a cistern?
No, not a cistern. A cistern is something where you save water that runs off the roof. Or this was a elevated tank where they would pump it full of water. And although the tank never got put in, they found they could do a submerged pump. Apparently that was just coming in, and so they put in a submerged pump. So that was, we had pressurized water in the house. House was probably, remember this was in the early 30s. House had probably been built around the turn of the century. It had a bathroom and plumbing, indoor plumbing and so on. And anyway, I remember going out there and being told we were going to move. A guy who had been renting the house had not taken care of it. I was told later he was an alcoholic. And rather than dispose of garbage, take it someplace and bury it or get rid of it, there were cans and stuff all around the front yard. I remember thinking how awful that place looked. And one reason Uncle Ben was willing to lease it so cheap was part of the deal was Dad had to clean it up, which he did. Build a fence around the yard and put in grass and shrubberies and so on. So it did fix it up. And that's where I was to spend my first 10 years. Well, I was 3 when we moved there, and the next 7 years we lived there.
So you actually lived there for 7 years?
We lived there 7 years till I was 10. And I went to school, Willow School. It was a 2-room schoolhouse. We initially had 2 outhouses out back. one for girls and one for boys. They had a garage where the teachers could park their cars. And you didn't get any snow in the Sacramento Valley, but in the wintertime you got a lot of rain. So they wanted a place for the teachers to park their cars. And right next door was it was a hall called the Grange Hall. The Grange was a farm organization nationwide. You can look that up on the internet, but the Grange catered to the farm crowd, and we had a Grange Hall next to the school that they used for their Christmas plays and things like that. In those days, they weren't worried about being politically correct, and you could do a Mary and Joseph deal in school and sing Christmas carols and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, we lived there. Dad was earning pretty good money running that Standard Oil station. Mother said he made about $150 a month, which was average working person, if he was lucky, made about $100 a month.
Did he get a house with that or no? So didn't some of the service station managers get houses or no?
No, he was no house. Anyway, he bought an old Dodge to drive back and forth to work, and in 1937 we'd had a 1930 Chevrolet. 1937, he decided they were doing well enough. They bought a new Chevy for Mother, and you can look up here again on the internet and see what a 1937 Chevy looked like. But, I thought it was a cat's meow. We had a nice car. We went to church in Woodland. First Christian Church was where Grandma had gone. Grandpa went Christmas and Easter. That was Grandma used to say the Elks Club was Grandpa's church because he always stopped there on his way home from work. He walked. He didn't have a car. They were only about 3 blocks from downtown, where the bank was, and later his insurance office. But he always stopped at the Elks Club for a couple of pops on the way home, and Grandma was very opposed to drink, so he'd always do his best to conceal it. But anyway, that's those were my younger years. In 1940, I found all this later. Dad had hired a secretary and apparently had an affair going with her. And so had stopped coming home every night. Claimed his station was 24 hours. Claimed he had to stay, look after the station. And besides that, he was far from home that couldn't come home, so Mother insisted that we move to town. And rented a place in town and moved in town. That was the summer of 1940. And John was born in September 35, so John was a little more than 5 years younger than I was. I wanted to keep going to Willow Oak School, and the house we rented was 2 doors from Mr. Stivers, Jim Stivers, who had worked for Dad in the service station, and while he was finishing his degree and became a school teacher and was teaching at Willow Oak. He taught I was through the 5th grade, starting the 6th grade in the fall of 1940. And Mr. Stivers offered to drive me back and forth when he went to school if I wanted to keep going to Willow Oak School. So I didn't have to go to the big school in town, which scared me to death.
It's all right.
Anyway, we pursued that the rest of the time I was there, and in February of 1941, Mother announced that she and Dad had been to the courthouse and she had just received a divorce, and we were moving to Iowa. So that meant a big change in life. But those were the early years in California. They were good years.
So how often did you see your dad after you moved to Iowa?
When we moved to Iowa, I saw my dad again in 1950.
So not until you were 20?
I was 20 years old.
Wow.
And
how come? By his choice, or just that's the way things used to be?
Well, here's what happened to him during those years. After the divorce, he married this gal that he'd been fooling with, and in less than a year, she developed Lou Gehrig's disease.
Oh, wow.
And within 2 years was dead.
Oh.
He, as soon as he was divorced and Tidewater Associated found out about it, well, I hadn't told you, he left Standard in 1936 because Tidewater Associated built a new service station in Woodland, and they talked him into taking it over as an independent dealer. He told me several times in later years that was the worst mistake he ever made in his life.
Is that right? How come?
Because being an independent dealer in the 1930s and an unknown brand, leaving Standard Oil, very few of his customers are willing to go with him to Associated.
Right.
And so he struggled. Those were the days, you know, when you checked the tires and washed the windshields and had a whisk broom to brush out the car, and had to do all those things in order to get people.
Well, those were the good old days.
That lasted until the late 60s. We were still doing stuff like that when we left New Jersey, moved back to Raleigh. So
Not that long ago.
that's not that long ago. So anyway, go back to California days. Let me tell you a little more about that, and then we'll put it on hold for a little bit.
Okay.
We used to always take a vacation in the summertime. Dad had good help that would, during the early years, I can't remember this, but they say when I was about 3, they took us to, they went to Yosemite. After that, I remember they would rent a house for a week at Stinson's Beach, which was north of San Francisco. Spend a week at the beach. 1939 and 1940 both, we went to the World's Fair at Treasure Island in San Francisco. Treasure Island's out in the middle of the San Francisco Bay.
Yeah, I've seen that before.
And tell you a little funny aside there, we were getting ready to leave, and Dad said, I want to see this show. Well, it was Sally Rand and her exotic dancers.
Oh.
And Mother got upset and said, we'll wait in the car, you go ahead. And so he went. Of course, all I knew was what I could see on the outside, the girlies with not much on. And at the time wondered what on earth the guy would want to do. Go see something like that, you know. That's where I saw my first television set.
At the World's Fair?
At the World's Fair. It looked like it was high, about 5 feet high. Square wooden box finished, if you remember the old radios that used to sit up like this.
Mm-hmm. It
had a slanted top and had a low about 6-inch square screen. And that's of course black and white.
Interesting.
But
what did they show? What was showing on the TV, do you remember?
At the time, just when we went by it, it wasn't working.
Mm.
And so I think they were showing cartoons, things like that, and it was wired to some type of player. I don't recall seeing what player there was, but
interesting.
The fact that they could transmit a picture was just almost unbelievable to a 9-year-old kid.
When did you get your first TV?
Our first TV, Mother didn't get one while I was still living at home. Your mother and I were married in '53, and you could buy a black and white TV, about a 15, 16 inch, for about $175. We saved up. We bought it while I was still in school in Omaha.
Oh.
But then we had that set. You probably remember that set. We had that still in New Jersey when Tom got laid off his job with Railroad Express in New York City. If you remember, they moved out and stayed with us while he was looking for work.
Yeah, I remember that.
And brought their color TV.
Right.
And kind of got us intrigued with color TV, and it wasn't long after that we broke down and bought a color TV.
It's funny.
You know.
When you think about iPods and all those other things.
What a change.
Yeah, you didn't grow up with the TV. Can you imagine that growing up with the TV? Yeah.
Shut that down for a while.
We will.
Eat some of these